Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Budget Appropriations Bill. Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, the previous government left behind a fiscal train wreck. It lost control of the budget and lacked the strength of leadership to fix the yawning structural deficit it created. It lacked the strength to rein in the reckless spending of the last 6 years of government. There is no doubt that the coalition was in no small part elected to clean up this mess, to repair the budget and to get government back living within its means. The budget brought down by Joe Hockey is totally consistent with that task. This budget puts Australia back on a sustainable path. It dramatically reduces Labor's record debt and deficit, while at the same time reducing the overall tax burden by something in the order of $5.7 billion. It's also a budget that invests heavily in infrastructure, and most importantly, it is a budget which backs our strengths, those things as a country we do as well as anyone and better than most. We are very deliberately looking to back our strengths as a country, not do the sort of things we have seen in the last few years, where in the middle of the biggest mining boom in our history, we saw a carbon tax introduced. And not happy with that, a mining tax introduced. And it's not just the taxes, it's the mountain of regulation which surrounds those taxes, which has added multi-billion-dollar burden to the operation of those businesses, and in many cases has now made us a lot less competitive, in fact uncompetitive, on some world markets in things that we have historically been world leaders. It now takes 2 years longer than it did in 2007 to get an approval for an LNG project, a large LNG project. Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, that means something in the order of $30 to $40 million a month has been added to the cost of a project of that order without nothing to be gained. It's dead money. It is hundreds of millions of dollars disadvantage compared with projects in other parts of the world. And in fact, the leaders of some of those companies have said to me that it is now cheaper to build a new train of gas, a greenfields train of gas in Canada, than it is to build a brownfields train of gas in Australia. Now, that is a most disgraceful legacy, a job-destroying legacy, a legacy for the Labor government which goes to our inability now even to compete on some areas that we have historically been world leaders. That is what we're doing in backing our strengths. That is what we're doing in getting the government back living within its means. Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, in this instance, we have seen, with the government borrowing $100 billion a day in the market, in the financial market, and that's what it took to build up hundreds of billions of dollars of debt. When they do that, it's a lot of money each day that's coming out of the financial markets. And as a consequence, there are so many small businesses in Australia which have not been able to acquire simple finance to roll over their mortgages. And as a consequence, especially small and medium businesses, they're the ones that have been affected. That is why there are 500,000 less jobs than there were in small business 6 years ago. 512,000 people have lost their jobs in small business, and they just wipe their hands of it. They criticise a budget. They criticise a budget which is seeking to put some resilience back into small business, put some profitability back into small business, to get the government away from competing with small business in the financial market, I've got so many small businesses in my electorate who could not refinance a simple mortgage of $180,000 or $250,000 simply to roll it over. Their financial institution would say, "We haven't got money for you, go and find it somewhere else." The doors have closed on so many businesses, not because they were unprofitable, not because they weren't going to see through the difficult times, but because they just simply couldn't get the finance to roll over their financial instrument. That is a consequence, a direct consequence, and it leads to jobs. For endlessly talking about jobs, they have destroyed over 500,000 jobs in small business.
Shame.
This is the engine room of our economy. It's the innovation centre of our economy. This has been known all along. Big business has outsourced innovation to small business and medium business. That's how our system works, and it has been undermined, it has been constrained, it has been in many ways destroyed in so many areas over the last few years. Acting Madam Deputy Speaker, to be sure, it is a tough budget, and there are unpopular measures, but like the Costello budget of 1996, it represents a major turning point. And the fact of the matter is, it's a simple proposition. If we did not act now, it would be much worse later. This current spending profile that existed when we took over, and will change if we get the support of those opposite or those independents in the Senate. If we are able to change the current policy framework, it means that what is coming down the line, which will be much more damaging than what we confront today, will not eventuate. And what I mean by that is that if you take the spending programs and extrapolate those spending programs, they accelerate. And if you compare that with revenue, let's assume even a 3.5% growth, which is 0.5% higher than the trend growth. If you go off into the future for 10 years at 3.5% and you maintain the existing spending programs that have been put in place, the gap widens, and it widens from something like $250 billion to $667 billion. That is what we're dealing with, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. That is why there's an urgency about doing something now, and that's why we've gone to structural changes in the budget, structural changes in health, structural changes in education, structural changes in welfare, all of things which will progressively put some common sense back into those spending programs. And it's not just common sense, it is a sustainable capacity to continue to deliver things like Medicare, to continue to deliver high-quality education, to continue to deliver the sort of assistance and the safety net that Australians deserve who are unable to look after themselves or achieve an acceptable standard of living. We want to be able to sustain those sorts of policy measures. But what we took over, what we inherited from the last 6 years of Labor government, has been a budgetary situation which would have blown out with a debt reaching $667 billion within 10 years, which would have meant not $1 billion a month in repayments, but $3 billion a month in repayments. And this would be untenable. We could not afford the spending programs. And in many ways, if you think back, if you were in this House for the last 3 years in particular, what we saw in the last year or so, I think, was a government which was convinced that they would not win this last election. And as a consequence, there was an obsession with planting time bombs, policy time bombs across so many areas. You look at it, the $80 billion they talk about for health and education, this was never sustainable. They had for the 4 years, the forward estimates for Labor last year, they had modest increases in all of those areas, and then there was an explosion of cost from 2016 onwards after the next election. This was deliberate political strategy from a group that thought they would not win, would not have to find the money, would put us in a position that we are today, having to defend tough measures. It was a callous, it was an objectionable approach by those opposite, pure politics, not looking after the interests of the nation, not doing things in the nation's best interest, playing politics with the budget. It was deliberate what has happened. This blowout that's going to come to the nation if we don't do something about it now was conceived and executed by those opposite for crass political purposes. They're trying to set us up with these time bombs down the track, these fiscal time bombs that we have seen. Now, we're going to address it, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're going to take... They created this problem, but we take responsibility for fixing it up. We were elected. People knew there was a mess. People knew there was a mess. Of course, people find it difficult to, after several years of debt-fuelled, reckless spending, everyone puts their hand out, everyone got whatever you want. You've got an opportunity in business, give you some government money. Got a problem in business, give you some government money. Got a problem in the community, not a problem. Sign another cheque and pay for it by borrowing money. All of us could borrow money tomorrow and create jobs for a little while. We could put a new deck on the house. We could paint the house. We could do things. We could go to top restaurants, any restaurant. We could spend money, create jobs. But after a while, the $200,000 we've borrowed has to be paid back. It is no different for this community. The borrowing, the reckless spending and the borrowing of the last few years and the built-in spending increases, which far exceed even above-trend growth for the economy, is of such an order that we need the measures that have been taken in this budget. But the thing is, with the structural changes, it will affect spending levels gradually over time. It will bring them back into order. It is not a king hit on the community. And the other point is that when you rein in spending, government spending, so that small business can get some finance to grow their business and to stay in business, when you do that, you create a situation where you've got to replace the government spending with other activity, with robust growth of the private sector. And so this government has sought to do the two things. On the one hand, live within our means as a government, but on the other hand, to open up opportunities for the private sector in a way that was diminishing at such a rate. Small business in particular, to get small business back in business, to reduce the taxes, get rid of the carbon tax, reduce corporate tax by 1.5%, try and remove all of these sorts of problems with big projects, get rid of the carbon tax, get rid of the mining tax, streamline the approval processes, get some efficiencies back into those, ensure that we can, in the future, compete effectively in these areas. There is such a magnificent opportunity emerging in those countries around us, countries that will have an explosion of the middle class from 600 million to something of the order of 3 billion, not in 100 years, not in 50 years, in the next 25 to 30 years. If we get ourselves lean and hungry and competitive and knowledge-based, then we will capture so much of that opportunity. The next 30 years for Australia can be spectacular, but we have to, as a community, as businesses, as governments, we have to look to that future. We have to get ourselves into a condition so that we are like an elite athlete. We are ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to us. And in that regard, we have sought to open Australia for business. It is why we have very aggressively sought to conclude the free trade agreements with Korea and with Japan, agreements that the last government failed to reach any conclusion in 6 years. We've done so many things with business to restore some predictability and some certainty and stability so that as a country we can take advantage of what is emerging, this spectacular opportunity that's emerging on our doorstep. It won't necessarily fall into our lap, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. We have to earn that. But we are so well placed. If we treat our neighbours with respect, get ourselves into great shape, we can have a wonderful future for ourselves, our kids and our grandchildren. Thank you.